Welcome to the Human Cloud Podcast, the spot where leaders come to move the future of work forward. Hey, so today we have Bettina Schaller. Just you wait for these titles that she has. The first is President of the World Employment Confederation, as well as an SVP as the head of Group Public Affairs at the Adecco Group. Now, if we were to sum it up, we just say, okay, she's a global world of work executive. Which, here's the thing. Our space works really well on the fringe. What I mean by our space is I mean flexible talent, specifically the supply you individuals wanting to be self-employed and mediated through digital platforms. Okay, so that's the space we're talking about. We work really well on the fringe. Specifically, if you look at a large company's external talent or contingent talent budget, we're usually less than 5%, right? We're that rogue category, which I'm going to bore you with numbers. You ready? These large companies spend between $1 and $5 billion a year on external talent. Most companies are over half external. Within that 1 to 5 billion, around 75% of that is unmanaged. Now, within that 75% of unmanaged, less than 5% of that is usually coming from these talent platforms. And there's over 800 of these talent platforms. So the chaoticness and the confusion is only going to increase. Now, why do I say that? I say that because Bettina is literally who we need to get on board to truly scale this future of work. Now, if we look at Adecco, we look at the traditional players getting behind this, and if we look at the World Employment Confederation, we look at the global government saying, yep, freelance, self-employment, independence is real. Now, here's the scary part, okay? I don't want to scare you too much, but by being real, there are a lot of risks around the freelance economy, self-employment, you name it. The first risk is if countries are not getting their tax dollars, right? That's a massive one. The second one is if these individuals feel like they're being exploited, meaning if you're self-employed, you don't get benefits, you don't get vacation, you don't get time off, you don't get health insurance, all these kinds of things. So number one, you might not be paying into the social safety nets. Number two, you might not be getting them. All this to say that I am so excited that we get to talk with Bettina today. And I'll tell you what, seeing leaders like her really embrace this and get behind this, and instead of saying no, saying it looks like there might be a challenge here and here and here, so let's face that and let's address it. Now, I want you right after this episode to go and look up all of our compliance-related episodes. I want you to go see Glenn Hodgson. I want you to go see Jonathan Wolfson, because you'll get a crash course in sort of freelance compliance 101. Now, without further ado, enjoy, then go drive some change. All right, Bettina. So we had a little bit of talk beforehand, but for you listeners out there, this is one of those super exciting first time meetings. Yeah. And I saw you. I think it was related to the World Bank or something. I forget exactly what it was. Right? And I went, how in the world have I not connected with her? And so simple LinkedIn outreach. You're super gracious enough to say, yeah, sure, I'll hop on this pod and we'll see what we talk about. And so I can't wait to learn from you, Bettina. I look at your background and I'm just so fascinated to see what you're focused on, what you're caring about. I think the overwhelming thing tying us together is future of work, right? And I know, currently at Adecco, but I think before I assume anything, do you want to give a little intro for our listeners?
Sure. No, and Matthew, thank you so much for reaching out. And it's true, we haven't connected except for an exchange of a few emails. So great to also put a face and a voice to your person. I, of course, Googled you, and found out whatever I could. And indeed glad that our path crosses. So listen, I landed up on anything related to the future of work pretty much 14 years ago. And I actually had no idea about the fact that there is an entire professional industry that is connecting businesses and people to work, right? So it's the private employment services industry. And I connected when I joined the Adecco Group. That's a Swiss-based multinational that operates in almost 60 countries across the world, and that looks at providing companies and workers every possible solution out there. Now, I joined absolutely not in a capacity as an HR expert, at the contrary, but with my rucksack of government affairs. I had worked in the private sector, in the financial services industry and actually the sports industry. And I had also joined the Swiss government. And so I've always come from the angle of the impact that regulation has on everything we do. And then, of course, also the absolute fundamental conviction that regulation is for us to co-create, right? Of course, it happens in capital cities and it happens in big international organizations. And you, of course, have smart people and hopefully experts who sit together and who negotiate. But then you need, again, experts from the specific space as well to contribute to whatever is being discussed. And so in my case, it is labor market policy, right? And I have, since I joined the Deco Group, always also connected my activities to trade association work. So where I am today, 14 years later, is that I am heavily involved with the Global Advocacy Association of the private employment services industry. So the organization that represents the interests of our industry. And I've been the president of that organization called World Employment Confederation for 3.5 years now. And then I'm involved in all types of, again, labor market policy, either working groups or committees. And there maybe some of your listeners and our friends and people who are interested, you might have heard of the G20. So that grouping of 20 most I think we can say powerful economies in the world, even though, I'm Swiss by background, and the Swiss have a little chip on their shoulder because they're not part of the G20, right? Countries, even though they're without any doubt one of the most powerful and rich countries in the world. But that's another story. Anyway, so the G20, which was initially put together or brought together around 15, 16 years ago. Well, about 11, 12 years ago, they also decided to get together around employment policy. And so every year, the labor ministers, the employment ministers of the G20 meet and make recommendations again to the heads of state. And so I'm involved there as well. And then there's another third organization, the so-called OECD, that's the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, with headquarters in Paris. They also look at labor market issues, and so I'm involved with them as well. So as you can see, my background and my linkage to the future of work is one which has to do with the structures, the system, right? It's how do we create the framework so that all of us who know that the world of work is changing and has radically changed, so how do we actually make it work so that people, have more flexible options and that people still get benefits and that people are able to connect either via platform or not, or that people, still pay taxes and then are part of a social security, even though they don't work in the country they're living, etc. So that, in a nutshell,
this is fascinating.
And I'm also about a few things more than that, but that's what keeps me busy in my, let's say, working hours.
Okay, quick question. Did you ever imagine you would be doing that when you looked at, hey, what am I going to be doing in 20 and in my career? Did you imagine this would be it?
Well, clearly not. And to be honest, I don't know many people who can say that. Maybe a heart surgeon, knows that, okay,
Yeah.
25 years later, she or he will still be a heart surgeon. No, I couldn't imagine. But actually, Matthew, people sometimes ask you, what's your big dream? And when I was a young, fearless, now I'm old and fearless, but when I was young and fearless, I always imagined myself to be the Secretary General of the United Nations, right? I thought, wow, this
Oh,
must be the
wow.
greatest job ever. I still think it would
Yeah.
be the greatest job ever. And maybe one day, you never know, maybe in the next life. But
Yeah.
that's kind of where my thinking went. And I mean, there's certain days where I feel pretty close to that one. So now it's been a good
Yeah.
ride for me, I must say.
The I think the first track we're going to go down. So there's multiple tracks, right?
Uh-huh.
There's going to be when we say future of work, what does that mean? That's
Hmm.
one track, okay? We're then going to look at the geographical differences and implications. And
Hmm.
so what's happening in the US versus the EU versus Asia, and we're both super fortunate. I mean, we work on every single continent.
Mm,
And so last night was late because we were dealing with Australia,
mm,
right? This
very late.
morning was kind of early, right? This morning's early because we're dealing with India and Europe. And so we're fortunate to see that. So that's going to be one track. And then I think the third track is going to be technology and
Hmm.
what in the world or how has technology impacted. But let me give you a quick story. So I don't think our listeners have ever heard this. So my first experience with work was, and I'll never forget, I always assumed you get good grades, you get into a good school, the good school gets you a good internship, the internship gets you a good job, and you just work hard,
Mm,
right? I had
mm,
that kind of like dreamy eyed. Now, my first internship was at a manufacturing
mhm.
plant, and we were doing wire EDM, CNC. So we're talking like salt of the earth manufacturing. My favorite people in that job were the people on the floor.
Mhm,
And so I would hang out with mostly immigrant, but the factory workers on their smoke breaks. I loved them, right?
mhm.
They all had families and kids. They showed me photos, you name it. My first job, though, in that internship, after I had painted the closet, done a lot of the grunt work, was please generate this grant or else we're going to have to lay off
Yeah,
15 of those factory floor workers,
yeah.
right? That was my, like, I don't know, I guess you could say awakening moment
Mhm.
that work was not this just kind of like, I don't know, beautiful, simple, work hard and you'll be taken care of, because those people on the floor, they wasn't their fault that technology had
Yeah,
overpassed them. And you have this, I think at the time I was probably 18, you have this 18-year-old intern trying to generate a grant from the state to keep their job.
yeah, yeah,
So that was my first aha moment of work was, okay, this is not working for them,
yeah.
right? This was not working for them at the time. And since then, I've had multiple experiences like that to go, okay, this work thing, meaning the traditional full-time employment, it hasn't worked in cases that I've seen. Now, for you, I'm super interested when you look at the world of work, the future of work. Why why do we even have to care about this more than just letting companies and individuals do what they want? What to you is really important, wrong, you name it. Why do we even have to have a conversation about the future
Yeah.
of work? And I know it's a very broad question, Bettina, so I gave you the hard one at first.
No, I can tell. And there's so many angles to go at this, right? And by no means, obviously, would I claim I have the answer. So maybe just a few snippets from my side. And I started it from indeed the fascination that I always also have in terms of how different countries and sometimes within countries, and the United States is a good example, how different states approach the frameworks that they build for, again, either their workers um, or their companies to be able to access talent. And what goes hand in hand with that is the approach to building educational systems, right? And so, frameworks that, uh, of course, we know in most countries these days, education is a human right. It's what everybody is entitled to do, to go to school and go through a path that will provide that person with the needed food for the brain to then be able to be an active participant in society. And so usually on average, education in the least cases and proportionally the least leads to academic fulfillment, right? And I fully respect that. But what I'm trying to say is mostly education should be leading to an occupation, to work, right? I mean, that's why we do it. Yes, to develop ourselves as humans, as a person. Again, to learn for the beauty and the sake of learning, and some in proportionately little cases people stay in that learning industry, but again it is also to acquire the basis to then be a productive member of society based on what that society needs. And despite that, most countries are not able to produce the workforce and give the people the tools to be productive. And so it's fascinating. If not, and I guess today I woke up with that militant mindset. I think it's irresponsible. I think it's irresponsible from countries and anybody who is in power not to again have that thought about the frameworks as a number one priority, right? Well, so now we have to accept it or not have to accept it, and that's where people like I come into the picture. Or actually, what's very interesting, I mean, this year is a year where over half of the world's population is electing new political leadership. There's elections in half of the countries around the world, right? And interestingly enough, in most of these, there's always part of the campaigning is always jobs and work. There's always the promise around, if you vote for me, if I'm going to be your next president or prime minister, whatever, then you will have a better, greater, longer, better paid job, etc. So super interesting because it's part of the promise. But then, unfortunately, very often when these people get to power, they tend to forget, what they promised. The first candidate where we really saw there was a massive shift was actually President Macron in France. When he was elected about 7 years ago for his first term, again, he very heavily campaigned on jobs. And the first thing he did when he came to power was to pull a labor market reform through. And the first and the biggest element of that was on the educational system. Because he said, like, to my point, we need to just prepare France's workforce for the future. And then we notably need to create work readiness programs. So, all of that is, for me, again, part of this this necessity these days to look at frameworks and to also and you mentioned the future of work was going to be the first big part of what we're looking at to adapt, have a very clear diagnostic of what is happening today, which many do, right? But then to act on that as well. And the easy way there is to look at countries where things are working. But let me maybe stop here. Long reply for a question, and I almost forgot the question in the first place.
No, I love it. I love it. And it's leading to, so here's going to be, I'm going to throw out a statement to you, and then I think it's going to bring about a question, and I'll give you a little bit of context to it. So my statement is going to be, how come we don't just lean into alternative work arrangements? Okay. So that's going to be my statement. My question is going to be, how do we think about the newer, innovative work models that obviously have massive implications, like freelance? So that's going to be my question is, and I think it's going to be like, where does freelance fit? Why, do we like freelance? Do we not like it? But so that's going to be the next theme. I'll give you a little more context. So now we're building on little intern that sees work totally not working for those people on the factory floor, and who I would argue were the hardest working people I knew. So now myself, I went down that rabbit hole of, top of my class for accounting. I got into the best job I possibly could, but I learned real quick this was not going to work for me. No matter how hard I worked, I was not going to be in a position of being able to control and protect myself. And what I could see was that, from an accounting perspective, as hard as I worked, there was still going to be a technology that replaced me. And I was not going to be able to prove my impact enough to commit to convince executive leadership that they should keep me. So that was my aha moment with work. And, and I was at the highest I could be. But I started freelancing, and it wasn't freelancing at the time. Okay. This was like 2012. And it was just working on a contractual basis as a consultant for small businesses around my hometown. And what I learned was that I had never been safer, because I was doing really good work for these clients. I was quantifying the impact. Usually it turned into more work if I wanted it to be more work. And so I dove headfirst into freelance is this thing that empowered me and can empower others. I went to Silicon Valley. I went to Microsoft. I've lived all across the world now because of this. But there definitely is still a question of, is freelance good or not? And the example I'll use here is from a US lens. There are two separate strategies. And I would say the current Department of Labor last week enacted what I would argue is the most anti-freelancer legislation, because it puts a lot of controls around if you're a freelancer or not. And it's more so on the stage of, nope, you should be an employee. But so next section is going to be, okay, we realize that work, there's it's not working as good as it should be. But what do you think about alternative work arrangements, and especially as freelance comes in? And I love that you also have the Adecco exposure as well, because you understand better than anyone, it's not as simple as everyone's a freelancer or everyone's full-time, right?
No,
so
exactly.
I think that's the next topic, Bettina.
Yeah, exactly. And look, I mean, it's really, there's probably, and everybody will have heard it. There's the notions of flexibility that come in, of course, in terms of the work contract that you should be entitled to opt for. But what we always say is that it needs to go hand in hand with security, and regulators, we know, always go from the risk notion, right, first. And they see every form of contract from that risk perspective. And they attribute an incredibly high level of risk to anything that is flexible, basically. So anything that is not your direct form of employment, that of contract, they consider is per se a vulnerable form of contract. Now, indeed, we at the Adecco Group and the whole entire industry, we've been able to showcase over the past years as we have matured, and also given ourselves all the parameters, that you need to give a well-regulated industry. We have showcased that agency work, for example, is the most secure form of flexible work. And if I look at regulators these days, they are absolutely willing to recognize that. But one very important part of our advocacy to many governments around the world, and actually, again, in the context, for example, of the G20, which is one of the umbrella contexts where this is being discussed. And actually, the other very important platform that we're using is the International Labour Organization, the ILO. So what we talk about is not actually alternative forms of work, but diverse forms of work. So the diverse forms of work is what we are asking regulators to recognize and to incorporate into that building of frameworks. because, and I think this is where we will chant along the same symphony, Matthew, you and I, there are indeed just multiple forms in which workers these days see themselves spending their days, earning their income from, and dedicating their know-how to, right? And it's also a matter of depending on what stage in life you're in. So clearly, that ominous direct employment relationship is actually not the norm. It's something that has been acquired over the past, years and decades maybe, but it's not something which has been around forever. And look, what we have to recognize is that there's of course an organized community of workers representatives out there, and I say this with the biggest of respect. They stand in for workers' rights, but I must say that very often it's at places where, again, supposedly you have open-ended direct employment contracts, that the working conditions are not ideal, and that your wages and salaries are not great, and that there is indeed a need to improve things. So I think our union friends and worker representatives, the one key for them is that they have members, right? And so what we've seen over the years is, of course, that flexible and adaptable workers are not the ones who will automatically join a union, and that's why there is a suspicion of our union friends towards flexible and adaptable workers. But otherwise, I think actually that our agendas, meet quite often. So, to come back, there's I mean, as you said, in the United States, but in general, it is clear that these days there is a trend, and not only trend, but the development towards the presumption of employment. We've just seen that in Europe as well, with the approval and the acceptance of the so-called Platform Work Directive that is brand new.
Yep.
Where indeed workers and freelancers are first considered to be the employees of whoever hires them, and then it's up to them to prove that they are not and that they are freelancers. So that goes hand in hand with just that security element, which of course goes hand in hand with wanting to tie workers in for social security, and then making sure that the whole benefit system is built on the right premises. Understandable, but maybe indeed not always as forward looking as one would think.
Now I wonder. So there's two things. There's two problems that you mentioned that seem to be in the way, and what I really wonder is, why is the key whys, and then how does change actually happen? So what I mean by that is, it's clear that the intention for every union, every government, even every employer, is to enable long-term opportunities for the worker, right? To enable individuals to be in a good spot. Now, full-time work has been, and this is what I would say, is full-time work has been the default. And whether it's you're contracting an agency or a consultancy, still that agency or consultancy is hiring that person on a full-time basis, even though it's an external person going in. So that's always been the default. But now when we look at freelance and this flexible in the US words, 1099 independent contractor lens, it is different, right? This individual is not working for anyone but themselves, and they have
actually would be illegal if they did then they couldn't use that contract, right?
Exactly. So you mentioned though that the two things in the way is, number one, risk. And so just straight up, this looks like risk if not full time. And the second thing is that worker probably is not going to join a union or something where there's a larger organization behind it. Now, why is this a problem? And I'll cede, I understand that if everyone became freelancers in the US, I think we would lose like $4 trillion in taxes, right? So I understand the very selfish incentive, but in your lens, why wouldn't governments, organizations want people to be able to freelance as much as they want?
Yeah, it's probably because there's still too many abuses to some extent, right? And I mean, not every freelancer is actually receiving the remuneration that she or he should. So there's an issue there that the market is still too I don't know.
Immature, would you say?
Immature, probably. That's a good word to use, too immature. And look, we've seen a series of companies, obviously they rely on the right type of talent. They themselves don't have the culture to go, towards a bigger proportion of freelancers. Because if they would do that correctly, it wouldn't be an issue, right? They'd be able to actually organize themselves properly and categorize everybody properly. And so there's abuses that are happening. And so there's just an element of having to protect, I guess, the true freelancers against the ones that, well, I think we use the term of bogus freelancers, bogus self-employment, where de facto those workers are tied into what is an employment relationship, but then it's just on both sides. It's not being executed in the proper way, and that's why that focus on categorization, on classification, I think is the right way to go, and that's why also if a freelancer clearly declares herself or himself as such, then should be highway is clear, right? To then live that choice properly. But it's those cases where sometimes also from the side of the employer, that form of contract is not being used properly. That's where the safeguards are being put in, and let's just hope that we are at a moment of just history, where it's all pretty new still, and it has the balance needs to be found, right? And therefore the balance might be tilting towards overprotection, and maybe for the true freelancers. And I can see how, in your case, the passion and the heart is there, and it is an absolute lifestyle. And I can see the frustration of, why should government stop me from doing that, right? Or why should it be seen as a negative? I am 100% with you. But maybe overall, you're still a lucky minority in that case as well. And we still all have to just make sure that the overall framework continues to be built so that eventually everybody can find that fulfillment that you have.
And I think you hit on a really important piece, because the next, sort of the last phase of this is, well, what should leaders do, right?
Yeah.
What should leaders actually do? And when I say leaders, there's two main groups of people listening to this pod. The first is enterprise leaders that are scaling freelance workforces, and then the second is the actual entrepreneurs or executive teams leading these talent platforms. But I want to make sure that I call out something you mentioned, and that is the industry is immature. That is 1,000% correct. And I would argue that the industry, although there's a lot of promise, the numbers aren't as sexy as a typical technology industry. And so for the past 20 years, if you look at tech, when there's promise, it's quickly turned into unicorns and IPOs. Whereas in our space, there are over 800 talent platforms. There are 2 public companies. There are 10 plus $100 to $500 million talent platforms. So it's a good industry, but there are many bad things that I want to make sure I call out that I think you didn't mention, but rightfully so. One of those is, if you look at most talent platforms, less than 5% of those workers are employed, meaning actually working on something. That's pretty bad, Bettina, right? Like, imagine if the economy had a 95% unemployment rate. That's pretty bad. So we got to fix that. The second thing, a freelancer can be fired at any time. That is the risk that we take. And so a client can tell us, don't want to keep working together. And most likely there's no protections for that. I'm not going to receive severance, right? I don't have vacation. There's things that aren't there. To your point, you absolutely nailed it. Now, and by the way, I've heard numbers on the percentage of exploitation, the workers that would be better in a full-time arrangement. It's actually, what would you think? What would you think the percentage of freelancers that are under the exploited mark? Would you assume like 10%,
You know what?
20%, 50?
I remember it's I can't remember the exact number, but it's far too high. It's far too high.
Well, so here's one of the problems. I don't know what data set you're looking at. What I've heard, and there's probably millions of numbers out there. I've heard it's around 17%. Now, where it gets sticky is, are we including rideshare workers, meaning like the Uber rideshare workers? I would say no. I would separate it by, we're talking about the B2B professional service freelance economy, not the B2C. So it's tough. But from your lens, what can leaders do about this? Should they be building in certain policies, certain practices, certain technologies? What can the leaders actually do about this?
No, and again, maybe you want to narrow down when you say which leaders. I mean, the ones I have in scope are the policymakers. There, it's clear. We're just saying, guys, open yourselves to the fact that this is coming. I mean, again, the numbers we see overall of the freelance economy, the freelance industry, is pretty small actually, but the trend is there. So it is coming. Of course, we're also seeing big trends like talent scarcity in many parts of the world due to demography, due to the impact of the digital revolution and in the green transformation as well. So, and then, changes in lifestyle. So, leaders that are in a situation that they can influence that framework, we're really putting the mirror in front of those and saying, open yourself, acknowledge that there's a need for diverse forms of work. And, look beyond the examples of exploitation and abuse. So don't equivalate, do you say that? Or don't equate,
don't equate
freelancing, to a negative experience, right? We're dealing indeed with a lot of, or I'm dealing with a lot of business leaders, of course, as well. Now, usually they have a pretty clear understanding that their overall shift of talent is tilting, right? And that it's the balance is tending towards more flexible. The issue I have is when it's only because of a reason of price and of cost. That is always part of the equation. I mean, clearly, let's not fool ourselves. But it's not right, and it's very short-sighted if any business and any leadership team out there only looks at the cost side of things, and that's why, to me, freelancers and open talent, it's a matter of your competitiveness. It's a matter of your innovation power. It's a matter of also, in many cases, meeting your diversity and inclusion goals. So I see this as an absolutely clear part of implementing your strategy. I mean, of course, I'm now thinking of bigger companies that operate, transnationally. But even SMEs these days, I mean, I have visibility in many countries in Europe. The picture is pretty much the same. Again, driven by scarcity, actually. So anybody who doesn't look beyond their front door and hasn't embraced the amazing options of a freelance workforce that sits anywhere in the world and is incredibly well educated, I think is losing out, right? So those leaders who haven't tried it yet, my advice is go for it. But again, don't look at it from a cost perspective. Look at it from the value add, your competitiveness, your innovation power, your the D&I capabilities, and obviously, look at it from a long-term holistic perspective.
So you nailed. It's funny. I didn't ask the question, but you got there, and we skipped. Yeah, and we were able to skip the last section because one of the from a purely business leadership lens, you always got to find the hook, right? Of listen, I don't want to change unless I need to, and that's been one of the toughest parts of being a freelance leader for so long. Is we are telling leaders, hey, instead of defaulting to your existing agencies or full-time, we have this third option. Now, this third option, to go back to the beginning of our episode, this third option is still immature, meaning there's not a full industry behind this. It's not as simple as no one gets fired by hiring an Accenture, right? Like that is not the case in freelance. We're still young and immature. But what you called out, and you echo a lot of what we are seeing and hearing as well, is there's a massive talent scarcity. And then to add on to that, talent is demanding different things than they did. And in some cases, they're demanding to not be full-time. Now, from our data, what you see is that many of the top 10% individuals, meaning the ones that are getting promoted in under 2 years, really become the quickest directors and VPs, they are choosing freelance because of the flexibility component and the ability to make a bigger impact as a freelancer. And they're calling themselves fractional or consultant, right? Like freelance. Next episode, Bettina, we'll talk about terms, right? But that's part of being immature is our terms are all over the place. But you hit on what I think is the most important part of this episode, which is you need to plan for this talent scarcity. And you can't just be cost driven. I want to make sure I call that out. That is a crucial point. And whether you're thinking about full-time or freelance, it's a first principle that if you're thinking based off cost, you're not thinking based off of value, right? So you nailed it there. Now, I wonder, Bettina, last question. And it really is, I know, right? I know. Well, listen, we've already hit 50 minutes.
I'm only getting started here.
I know. Next episode, we're going to slot in 1 to 2 hours. And this is but listen, last question is, can you please show off for us? And what I mean by that is tell us what you're most excited about. It can be something that you're working on, something about that you're learning about. Yeah. Tell us what are you most excited about?
Listen, it's something that I'm indeed working on, and it's something that, as so often, I also have an incredible, huge amount of respect of, because I'm very ignorant, and in my view, nobody can anticipate the effects. It's the whole AI. Impact on the workforce and on HR and workforce solutions, and I'm excited because I'm part of the journey for the industry. The industry has obviously clearly picked this up, and the Adecco Group as well. And I'm actually leading the responsible AI work, specifically of the Adecco Group. And that is tremendously exciting because I'm now part of an organization that is really putting a zero tolerance mindset and foundational approach to that ethical side of things, right? And we know that the use of AI in the workforce solutions sector is identified as one of the highest risks. I mean, no surprise there. It affects people. People can be discriminated against. In a worst case, they can get hurt, notably by just not either receiving jobs or being directed in the wrong direction, or hopefully not worse. And so to be part of an organization and co-building an entire ethical approach to we want to make sure always that we do whatever we can. There's never a 100% guarantee, but we do whatever we can to develop that whatever intelligence, if it's artificial or whatever, and teach it and direct it in the best way possible. I think that's very inspiring because it goes beyond, to me again, what we're translating into products. There's a whole social and societal impact part in that. And I also think, again, it's very exciting because, unfortunately, again, in that industry, there are too many rogue players, and there are too many guys who are going to cut corners, and they're gonna apply whatever facial recognition in interviews, and people are going to be badly treated because of whatever, again, things are being detected there, and it's only a minimal example, right? Yeah. And so we need to again have the good guys that are looking to put boundaries there on the bad guys. And I didn't get into regulation in my line of work to be policing others. Clearly not. It's really about building the right frameworks. But in order to do that, you need to, again, have the energy to, build the things the right way around. And so that's what continues to excite me now in this age of technology and in this age of AI, where everything is out there for us to co-create. And so to be a little part of that is very, very motivating.
So sowing the seeds of next episode, and sowing the seeds of everyone that I want to reach out to, Bettina, is the ethical AI. And I would argue, from what we've seen and the way we described it in the book was about AI plus freelance, and this was technically written in 2019. Back when we were talking about deep learning, not large language models. But so we call it the amplification effect, which true in full-time employment becomes more true in a freelance world. And it would stay true in an AI world as well. And so if this is bad for you in a full-time world, it'll be even worse for you in an AI-driven world, unfortunately. So listen, this has been incredible. Bettina, the most important question is, okay, where can our listeners find you so that they can all follow you, learn from you, reach out to you? That is probably by far the most important question.
Well, I think they just listen to your podcast, right? And then
that's right. Is there a website?
We didn't rehearse this answer, did we?
No, we didn't rehearse any of the answers.
There you go. No, I mean, where can they find me? I don't know, follow me on LinkedIn. That's probably the safest bet. And then, reach out and I travel quite extensively, so if you see me walking somewhere in a conference or whatever, come up to me. I'm the tall one with the blue eyes. People don't believe me when they say that, and then they meet me and go, bloody hell, you're tall. I'm like, yeah, I told you. So there you go.
There's the challenge. Okay, there's the challenge to everyone. I will say, if they can find you on a street, we'll give them whatever they want. We'll give a free T-shirt, free book. Maybe that'll be a raffle. Listen, if you can find Bettina in the wild,
I'll send them your way for the free book. But
Exactly.
no, open doors. Clearly, open doors.
Perfect. Well, Bettina, thank you so much for hopping on.
No, thank you.